If your car gets stuck in the mud, slamming on the accelerator isn't likely to get you unstuck. It'll probably just get you more stuck, and maybe get some bystanders messy in the process. Our next speaker, an indie developer who's worked on Super Crane Bug as well as Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon, has 5 practical strategies for getting your game dev project unstuck and back on the road. Please welcome to the stage César Abraham Domínguez Garza.
So thank you so much and welcome to my talk, Getting Unstuck, 5 Practical Tips for a Smoother Game Development. I'm César Abraham Domínguez Garza, also known as Calix Humio. I'm a mechatronics engineer. I used to make apps for a long time. I'm a pixel artist and animator, but I'm mostly known for making puzzle games, for making small pico-8 games, and recently for helping development of Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon. I'm also a very incisive person, and I struggle a lot and can get overwhelmed with very simple things. So I'm going to be talking about the tips and tricks that I've gathered to overcome some of these paralysis when I find myself stuck. When problems start to feel overwhelming to solve, but not necessarily on catastrophic scenarios. The idea being that if you are in a stuck situation, you could use these tools to provide you with enough guidance to get enough traction to continue. So the first one is form follows function. And I learned this from a video of John Fraze, an artist and animator. And the video is named Why Does My Concept Looks Boring? And in this video, he explains how maybe just copying something will probably result in something boring, but the ability to be able to look into real life details will improve your concepts. He says, we add function to our designs so you can feel this object is connected to a story, to the real life of someone, and everything is going to be linked with the activities of the people using this object. So for example, this drawing from James Gurney, he created a book about a fantasy society where dinosaurs still exist, named Dinotopia. He sent this design to his friend who actually designs firing trucks, and he basically replied, wow, that looks great, but that won't work. His friend pointed out the flaws of how fragile the ladder is, how unnecessarily complex the water system is, like why do you have a mechanical dinosaur and moving water isn't like that easy, and how unprotected the dinosaur is. So he sketched some other modifications that it will make sense in that world. And the end result was a concept that actually felt like it belonged into a real living world. So I've been inspired a lot by concepts like those for my own bug verses, and I keep very close the form follows function in mind. So one of these concepts became this mock-up for a platformer, 2D platformer. I started to make like the bug, like some the move set, like the tile set where it's going to be playing around. And then I got stuck into these 2 animations because it doesn't make sense that you use a drill if you have like this long claws. But then I wasn't like super convinced about the closed animation because it looked a little bit weak and a little bit boring. So I went back and tried to make a little bit more of these small concepts with this book, like what is it exactly doing and who is it and stuff like that. And I found out a swimming motion that served me more a lot better, which is like swimming like a drill, which like I love drills actually. The motion was like super convenient for my game. And I thought of the drill strengths, and it was going to be like used on a very sturdy floor or walls surfaces. And I came with this idea where you absorb specific minerals instead of like destroying the wall, which served a lot for my gameplay. So I modified the animations, and the drilling now shows that something very strong is happening at the tip, and the swimming motion or the digging motion now shows this smearing spiral, right? And it looks a little bit better, in my opinion. So everything's right. Although I'm not sure this is a good example for form follows function, but I think they're like on the same axis. But people will tell me that I added juice to my animations. So I'm going to add an appendage to this, saying that form follows function for static things. But for moving things, I will say juice follows physics. And what other people tend to call juice, for me, is more about adding physics and logic. This moving platform, for example, has weight and inertia and friction. I added this smoke effect and screen shake, not necessarily to add juice, but because something was missing, the weight of the platform. And I feel the same thing when I'm animating or making stuff similar to that. There's a lot of concept in animation, like overshooting, anticipation, breaking the joint. But I think of them more like friction, elasticity, and conservation of movement. Whenever I add small VFX like this, I always consider things like our friction, like it reduces the speed the faster it goes. Breeze, which is like just random movements in every direction. The explosion of how every element is equally spread around, but not exactly, just vary a little bit the angle, maybe the size or the speed. All in all, form follows function and use follows physics are about finding something suspicious and looking closely. Looking for solutions from real life to add them to our designs, whether it's about the shape or its movement. So form follows function, use follows physics. If something looks off or boring, maybe weak, ask yourself, what might be looking fake? What details could I be missing? Is it supposed to work like that in this world? And how will that work like in real life? The second one is follow your trellis. So a trellis is one of these things for plants to be able to grow in a specific shape. I didn't know that word even, but I got this idea from Theory of Fun and the word once I read where it uses the analogy for the player experience. But in this case, I'm using it for growing the game. For example, I made a lot of Pico 8 games, which is Pico 8 is this fantasy console that has some harsh restrictions, like old games have. You have a limited palette. The screen is 128 by 128 pixels. You only have one sprite sheet of the same size, and the amount of code is super limited. So it limits the shape a Pico 8 game can have. You will probably use 8x8 sprites because the tool helps you with that. The game is not going to be that big. But these limitations and these constraints are its strengths for me. They've helped me focus on what is important and are the reason that I haven't actually finished many of these games. But when I'm talking about a trellis, I mean everything that supports or limits the shape. For my Pico 8 games, the engine was a big part, but there are other elements that influence greatly any game, like the design pillars, the team strengths, the processes or game vision. For example, in A Good Snowman is hard to build. The levels were designed using Puzzle Script, which is an engine specific for making Sokoban-like puzzles where you like just move boxes. And the team will test a level if it worked on Puzzle Script and then import it into their project in Unity using their own tools or their own processes. And pretty sure a pretty similar process was used for their other games like a Monster Expedition. So their engine strengths, the tools and processes they already had shaped these and other games for them. For a different example, in Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon, we were in charge of making all the content for the first DLC. And what we were instructed is to add 4 challenges with maybe some vague ideas of what they should be. But so obviously I entered in panic, right? Like, because there was just so many different things we could do with these ideas, and it was just so vague and it was overwhelming for me. So I take a breath, stopped and looked at what we had available. We had a lot of enemies and lore from the base game. We had freshly refactored code, which we were working because otherwise we're going to like get stuck fixing the same bugs over and over. Shovel Knight has a huge fan base, and there's like a lot of favorite characters and knights from the games, even enemies. And each knight has like a lot of skills that obviously were in the game. Each knight has like a single ability, but the bosses have different things they can do, and they have this fighting game, which is Shovel Knight Showdown. So we actually liked making the ideas and making different abilities for the knights. So we thought that maybe one of these challenges will be just like the introduction of this secondary ability. And hard mode, we could be like, oh, just adding more enemies, because there were like so many enemies that we could pick about. So it wasn't like going to be that much of a struggle to start picking enemies, because the levels were the same from the original games. Wacky mode, we felt we could figure that one later. And the last one, we thought we could pull something either from specifics from what the Knights did on the games, or maybe something from like the fan base or some memes, stuff like that. And once we like started to figuring out what's entailed for each one of these challenges, we noticed that everything sort of fall into the same category of modifiers. Knight abilities were already coded as a sort of modifier, and Knight challenge were programmed later in a similar fashion. So we thought most of the features of modifiers, especially because at some point it was hard not to think of something fitting somewhere else, like pushing units instead of attacking them could be part of a challenge, could be a B skill, could be even a relic or an item. So this modifier structure gave us the confidence to start working on some of the features, I mean, if we weren't sure if they will fit, because in the worst scenario, we could all push all that into the wacky mode. And this led us to be free and get some completely unique gameplay in some of these different challenges. And because the system was so dynamic, it was super straightforward. But it was super complicated to make this UI, but it was straightforward to think about setting all this up as modifier for these other features, which is the headshot, where you can opt into or out of some of these modifiers. And so even some features that were coded and discarded, for example, some Knight abilities, were brought back in the form of hats. All of this was possible to the fact that we relied on the strengths of our teams, the advantage that we already had, which helped clear the path forward to finish this DLC. So if you're struggling to find the path ahead of what you should do, because, well, in games, everything changed. So ask yourself, what is easy for the team to make at that moment, and what is complicated to do? Which strengths and weaknesses the team has? What do you need to change moving forward? Like, what maybe that's a moment to make a decision, and maybe what should you forfeit of doing? And this ties into the next one, which is say leave it to a sequel, which is a little bit self-explanatory. For many of the ideas of the DLC, there were also so many that looked so fun to make, but a little bit unfitting, like making a modifier that converts it into a platformer, like Super Puzzle Platform Deluxe. Fulfilling this idea will require new animations, new enemies and hazards, or basically a completely different game. And we had so many great ideas like that one, like making a match 3, or we had one that it was making a breakout game, because our system allowed it. But for this one, it was the first time that I remember someone saying, let's leave it to the sequel. And now it's sort of a mantra of mine. Before, we have said it like leave it to the next DLC, but this time it was more like an acceptance that this feature, as cool as it was, as possible as it wasn't going to happen in this game. But the door wasn't closed for it, so it left like this idea into this limbo state where it is not going to be done, but it's also like not canceled. And thinking on that and looking at my games, I think that has been happening. Ideas or mechanics that were forcefully removed because they won't fit in the game, they have come back into the next game, sometimes fully fledged, or maybe a different iteration. It gives me some hope that of the games that I'm going to be making in the future. So I would love to put it in a more cheesy way, like dream of your next game or something like that. But I think it's super, super practical to just say it, like, just leave it to a sequel or to a DLC. It's okay. So if you're struggling to prioritize ideas or like leave some ideas behind, ask yourself, could we get this idea grew a little bit more? Is it important to do now, or is it even needed? And if so, why didn't we notice it earlier? And maybe what other game can you make with this idea? Okay, the story stack. This is a big one. So I originally learned this from my micro talk from JC Shell from JC. And he explains that this story stack, which is like story, world, economy, action, fantasy, moving from the most flexible to the less flexible. And you will say, first of all, like, isn't the story and fantasy the same thing? Well, no. Fantasy is more like this abstract thing, or the core of everything. Like, and in this case, like adventure, like slaying monsters, like being a hero, saving the princess, stuff like that. While the story is like the very specific things, like, okay, this person named Link found this sword and goes and save the Princess Zelda from these evil guys, stuff like that. And why is the story most flexible than fantasy? Well, that's because the story depends, for example, from the world that it happens. You cannot modify the world that easy because it will impact the story, but you can modify the story without modifying the world, and the same for everything else. So most games, especially prototypes, tend to live or grow from action. Most of my games do. So I'm going to give examples around this. For example, in Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon, at some point we were tasked, this is near release, we were tasked with ramping 3 relics and making 3 more. So it's not like we were stuck, but it was like so close, too close for comfort. So I entered panic mode, so I went back and I went immediately looking into action, like, okay, what is our game, first of all? And I found out that most of the things relate to pumping, like the player just like move the character, but character will like interact differently with every single item. If you bump into an enemy, you attack it. If you bump into a potion, you drink it, stuff like that. So yeah, you get items, you buy relics, you kill the enemies, you maybe apply status effects. And if you kill enemies, you progress in the level. You can open chests with keys, stuff like that. And one of the core mechanics is making chains of enemies. If you hit one enemy, you hit everything that's connected to it, if they're the same type. But also something that we do a lot in this game that we didn't thought about until that moment was that you also like move around and you wait for stuff to happen. So yeah, these were like 2 big flags. Like we didn't have that many things interacting with the main mechanic that was making chain, and we had like nothing about this other thing that you do most of the time, which is just moving. So for making chains, we modified 2 of the relics. One just gives you health if you make big chain. We revamped the other one to make like chains explode every single time you get a new chest. So we also like get some chest interactions over there. And we made the Fury Horns with which every time you make chains, you get a bonus damage for the next time you make a chain. So it like flows into itself. We made another damage relic, which were the shockproof socks. Which now, if you move a lot, you will get charged like electric static, and that will help into the just moving a lot, because there were a lot of players that will get stuck and unable to know what to do and stuff like that. So these helped like those kinds of players. And for the other 2 new relics, we made the mentor manual, which just multiplies the progress, making the levels faster, and the toad totem, which was something that was an underused feature, which was the poison, and we made it available to all the characters. So just by glancing a little bit over the actions of that the characters can do, we got these solutions super quickly. Another example from my game, A Day Off, I was stuck making the levels. Like I already had coded the mechanics, I already had a bunch of levels, but I was trying to figure out how to present them, like which one should be first, should like I make a map or something. So then I went into the story stack and asked like, okay, what's the economy for a puzzle game? Because I think it's a little bit more clear for example, adventure games, which like obviously the money you get, but it's also like the items you can get, the keys or that it's everything that you can collect and move around. For puzzle games, it's more like about the things. Yeah, it's still the things that you can carry with you, like the levels you can complete, for example, but also the knowledge that you start to learn from puzzle to puzzle, like the tricks and how to move specific pieces. So, okay, I went and checked like, okay, what's all the things that you can learn from this game? And I started to notice that there were a lot of basic things that I wasn't like thinking really about, like boxes exist, they can be moved, they can be put inside these storage units, they can be put back, you can have multiple of those. And it starts to like feel like it's maybe too specific, but I want to be as detailed to like not miss anything. And it actually paid off. Once I started to get into more specific mechanic stuff from, for example, these joints, these are like some chairs that just have to be always touching each other. I started to notice that there were tricks on these pieces, like if you want to move a box from the bottom right corner into outside, you will have to make like very specific movements. So for some of the puzzles that I already had designed, these like popped out super clearly. Like, oh, of course, to be able to like make the chairs move from one corner of the room to another, you have to like make these weird movements. So I tried to list like all these tricks, and then try to make this map out of every single like bit of knowledge that you can like learn from the game, and try to put the levels that I already have into each one of these to see like if I already have filled like some of this. And from this point out, it was like super clear. I could go and finish my game, filling the spaces, making the puzzles for the tricks that I was missing or for knowledge I was missing. And the full game is obviously not reflected by this, but it was like an immense help. And even after that, the fact that mixing mechanics resulted that it wasn't a good idea for this game from that roadmap shaped the world and the story of this game, making every chapter focus on each one of the mechanics. And this helped in shaping the story. For example, at the end, the last levels are about organizing one obscure corner where everything is dumped, for example. So I'm going to add an appendage to these two, and is to list all the elements of whatever you're having trouble with, because just a quick glimpse of like the list of everything that you it helps you recognize or find out stuff that you haven't been seen yet, and it's super valuable information. So the story stack, which is fantasy, action, economies, world story, and list all your elements. This helps if you are struggling to grow your game, and ask yourself, do you know what is the fantasy of your game? What are all the character actions? What are all the things that you can collect? Does the game tells you when to use them? And can the game actually fit all these? This more a little bit more about scope, but that also has helped me in some other games. The last one, state the problem. So in GC, there was this tag which I recommend a lot, which says it's called the most important question in game development, and I agree that what problem are we trying to solve is the most important question. But I already had learned this from other experiences. In the past, I've had experiences where I hear phrases like this, like, I just don't like it, or I don't want to elaborate. And these things stop me on my tracks. Like, this indicates to me that the only way forward will be to be the louder person in the room, and I don't want to get to that point. But I still didn't have a way to move forward. When I found this again, I was still struggling big time on how to communicate, and didn't feel that the other person was respecting my point of view, even if we were on the same level. So I went with a couple of friends and talked about it, and they sent me a lot of things. So this is a summary of the things. If they don't know what problem you're trying to solve, then they honestly won't have a way to even get feedback. They could say, I do like it, but it will be just meaningless. And the second most broken communications can happen when folks are working on different problems. The problem sets are so different, but they're both right. So yeah, that's what's happening with me in this situation. We thought we were talking about the same issue, but we weren't. And what I want to happen, and I was seeing happening in the game, was different from theirs. And I could continue and ask deeper, which I did. And I did found more details, but I also made the other person a bit upset because I was constantly questioning them. So once I started phrasing the issues I had with stating the problem and then try to give solutions if needed, it negated completely phrases that were conversation stoppers for me because we will start immediately. We will catch if we were solving some issues or tag if the problem was worth solving. And once the other designer catched up on this format, it worked pretty great for the next issues we had. So yeah, the problem is you are struggling to reach consensus as yourself and or the team. What problem are we trying to solve? Why is it a problem? What are the pros and cons of a specific solution? Is this a personal opinion? Is this what the game really needs? And that's it. Ooh. Thank you so much to the folks at Game Devs of Color Expo for inviting me. I hope some of you can get use of some of these tools, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. And I'm going to be in the chat, I think, so feel free to contact me, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Sometimes you just need a nice set of tricks to help you get out of a jam. I think every creative project gets a little gummed up along the way, and I appreciate that César's toolkit comes with a wide range of techniques to approach a broad range of struggles. Thank you so much for your time and your talk, César, and I hope you and the audience will be able to use one of these techniques on a future project of yours.